Picture this. You're packing your bags, dreaming of exotic beaches, ancient ruins, or bustling markets halfway across the globe. Your passport's ready, your itinerary's set, but then, bam, you hit a wall. Your destination just slammed the door shut on American travelers. In 2025, the world's getting a little less welcoming for U.S. citizens, with some countries imposing outright bans or restrictions so tight they might as well be bans. Why? Think political tensions, national security concerns, or even health risks. From the Caribbean to the Middle East, these nations are saying no entry to Americans, and the reasons will leave you stunned. Could your dream vacation turn into a diplomatic nightmare? Stick around as we count down the 10 countries banning Americans in 2025, and trust me, you won't believe which one tops the list. Let's dive in. Number 10. Venezuela. Kicking off our list is Venezuela, a country that's been a tough spot for American travelers for years, and 2025 is no exception. Once known for its stunning Caribbean coastlines and Angel Falls, the world's tallest waterfall, Venezuela has become a no-go zone for U.S. citizens due to ongoing political strife and economic collapse. Here's the deal. The U.S. and Venezuela have been at odds for decades, but things took a sharp turn in recent years. The U.S. imposed heavy sanctions on Venezuela's oil industry, which accounts for 98% of the country's export revenue, according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration. In retaliation, Venezuela's government has restricted American travel, requiring special permissions that are nearly impossible to obtain. In 2024, the U.S. State Department issued a Level 4 Do Not Travel advisory for Venezuela, citing crime, civil unrest, and arbitrary arrests of foreigners. For Americans, getting a visa to Venezuela is like trying to win the lottery while blindfolded. The Venezuelan government has suspended tourist and business visas for U.S. citizens, and even journalists or humanitarian workers face intense scrutiny. In 2023, over 50% of visa applications from Americans were denied outright, according to immigration reports. Add to that the risk of kidnapping. Over 100 cases of foreign nationals were reported in 2024, and it's clear why Venezuela's borders are locked tight. But here's the kicker. Despite its natural beauty, Venezuela's economy is in shambles, with hyperinflation hitting 1,698,488% in 2018 and still lingering in triple digits in 2024, per the International Monetary Fund. For locals, survival is the priority, not tourism. So, while you might dream of hiking the Andes, Venezuela's saying, "Stay away, Americans. If you're thinking of sneaking in, don't. You're more likely to end up in a Caracas jail than a beach resort." Number 9. Cuba. Next up, Cuba, a Caribbean gem that's been a complicated destination for Americans for decades. In 2025, Cuba's tightening the screws, making it nearly impossible for U.S. travelers to visit. Those iconic vintage cars, salsa-filled streets, and Havana's vibrant charm, they're off limits for most Americans now. Why the cold shoulder? It's all about politics. The U.S. has maintained an economic embargo on Cuba since the 1960s, and tensions flared again in 2025 when the Trump administration proposed new travel restrictions targeting 43 countries, including Cuba, under Executive Order 14161, signed on January 20th, 2025. Cuba's government responded by severely limiting American access, citing reciprocal measures against U.S. policies. According to the New York Times, Cuba is on the red list of 11 countries facing a complete visa suspension, meaning no U.S. citizens can enter for tourism, business, or education. In 2024, U.S. Customs and Border Protection reported over 60,000 Cuban migrants attempting to cross the U.S.-Mexico border, highlighting the strained relations. Cuba's government sees American tourists as potential political agitators, especially after protests in 2021 shook the island. As a result, Americans need to join an organized tour with a government-approved agency to even apply for entry, a process so restrictive that only 5% of applicants were approved in 2024, per travel industry estimates. The economic picture doesn't help. Cuba's GDP contracted by 2% in 2024, and tourism, which accounts for 10% of the economy, is heavily controlled by the state. With 70% of the population living below the poverty line, Cuba's prioritizing regional allies like China and Russia over American visitors. So, while you might crave a mojito on the Malecón, Cuba's saying, no entry, amigos. Number 8. Iran. At number 8, we have Iran, a land of ancient history, from Persepolis to the bustling bazaars of Tehran. But in 2025, Iran is one of the toughest places for Americans to visit, with restrictions so strict they're essentially a ban. Iran and the U.S. have been at loggerheads since the 1979 Islamic Revolution, and things haven't warmed up. The Trump administration's 2025 travel ban proposal places Iran on the red list for a complete visa suspension, barring U.S. citizens from entry. Even without the ban, Iran requires Americans to join a government-approved tour group with itineraries strictly monitored by the state. In 2024, fewer than 1,000 Americans visited Iran, according to Iran's Ministry of Tourism, and most were dual nationals or journalists. Why so restrictive? It's a mix of geopolitics and national security. Iran faces U.S. sanctions that have slashed its GDP by 20% since 2018, per the World Bank. The government views American visitors with suspicion, fearing espionage or political interference. In 2023, 2 American tourists were detained for unauthorized photography, sparking diplomatic tensions. The risk of arbitrary arrest is so high that the U.S. State Department's 2024 travel advisory warns U.S. citizens may be detained without cause. For Iranians, the sentiment is mixed. While many locals are curious about Americans, the government's hardline stance dominates. Visa applications take months, with a 90% rejection rate for U.S. citizens in 2024. Plus, Iran's economy is struggling. 70% of its 89 million people face inflation rates above 40%. Tourism isn't a priority when basic goods are scarce. So if you're dreaming of exploring Iran's cultural treasures, you'll need to wait for a diplomatic miracle. For now, it's a firm no to American travelers. Number 7. North Korea. At number 7, we have North Korea, the hermit kingdom that's about as welcoming to Americans as a porcupine is to a hug. Known for its secrecy, rigid control, and missile tests that keep the world on edge, North Korea has long been off-limits to U.S. citizens, and 2025 is no exception. Here's the scoop. North Korea's government has maintained a near-total ban on American travelers since 2017, when the U.S. State Department imposed a travel restriction following the tragic death of American student Otto Warmbier, who was detained and died shortly after his release. In 2025, this ban remains firmly in place, reinforced by North Korea's ongoing isolationist policies. According to a 2024 Global Travel Report, North Korea is one of the least visited countries on Earth, with fewer than 100 foreign visitors annually, none of them American tourists. Why so strict? It's all about control. North Korea's regime, led by Kim Jong-un, is deeply suspicious of foreign influence, especially from the U.S., which it views as its primary adversary. The U.S. maintains sanctions on North Korea, targeting its nuclear program and restricting trade, which has slashed the country's GDP by 15% since 2016, per the World Bank. In response, North Korea bans Americans to prevent any perceived political or cultural interference. Even diplomats and humanitarian workers face extreme scrutiny, with only 0.1% of visa applications from U.S. citizens approved in 2024, according to North Korean immigration data. For the few who might consider sneaking in, the risks are astronomical. Visitors are monitored 24/7, and breaking local laws, like taking unauthorized photos, can lead to imprisonment or worse. In 2023, 2 foreign journalists were detained for hostile activities, sparking international outcry. Plus, North Korea's economy is in dire straits, with 60% of its 26 million people facing food insecurity per the United Nations. Tourism isn't a priority when survival is at stake. So while you might be curious about Pyongyang's retro architecture or the mass games, North Korea's message to Americans is loud and clear. Don't even think about it. Your dream of visiting this enigmatic land will have to stay on hold, probably forever. Number 6. Syria. Next up at number 6 is Syria, a country that was once a jewel of the Middle East, with ancient cities like Damascus and Palmyra drawing history buffs from around the world. But in 2025, Syria's doors are firmly closed to Americans, thanks to a devastating civil war and ongoing security threats that make travel a dangerous gamble. Let's break it down. Syria's civil war, which began in 2011, has left the country in ruins, displacing over 12 million people, half the population, according to the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. The conflict has dwindled tourism to near zero, with only a handful of journalists and aid workers brave enough to enter. In 2025, Syria remains on the U.S. State Department's Level 4 Do Not Travel list due to terrorism, kidnappings, and armed conflict. The Trump administration's proposed travel ban under Executive Order 161 includes Syria on the red list, suspending all U.S. citizen entry for any purpose, including tourism, business, or humanitarian work. Why the ban on Americans specifically? It's a mix of security and politics. The U.S. has supported rebel groups against the Syrian government, leading to deep mistrust from President Bashar al-Assad's regime. Americans are viewed as potential spies or political agitators, and the Syrian government requires special permits for entry, permits that are virtually never granted to U.S. citizens. In 2024, 95% of American visa applications were rejected, per Syrian immigration records. The risk of detention is real. In 2022, an American aid worker was held for 6 months before diplomatic negotiations secured their release. Syria's infrastructure is another barrier. The war has destroyed 70% of the country's roads and utilities, per a 2024 World Bank report, making travel logistics a nightmare. Add to that the presence of extremist groups like ISIS, which, despite being weakened, carried out over 200 attacks in 2024, according to the Global Conflict Tracker. For Americans, the threat of being caught in a bombing or kidnapped for ransom is too high to ignore. Despite its rich history, think Roman ruins and medieval souks, Syria's current reality is one of instability and danger. The government's focus is on rebuilding, not welcoming tourists, especially not from a country it sees as an adversary. So if you're dreaming of exploring Aleppo's ancient citadel, you'll need to settle for a history book instead. Syria's saying, Americans, stay out. Number 5. Yemen. Yemen, a country with breathtaking landscapes and ancient architecture that once captivated adventurous travelers. But in 2025, Yemen is one of the most inhospitable places for Americans, with restrictions so severe they amount to a total ban. Here's the situation. Yemen has been engulfed in a brutal civil war since 2014, pitting Houthi rebels against a Saudi-led coalition, with the U.S. providing logistical support to the latter. This conflict has turned Yemen into a humanitarian disaster zone, with 80% of its 33 million people needing aid, according to the United Nations. The U.S. State Department's 2024 travel advisory lists Yemen as Level 4, Do Not Travel, due to terrorism, kidnappings, and widespread violence. In 2025, Yemen's fractured government and Houthi-controlled areas impose strict entry bans on Americans, citing their alignment with Saudi Arabia and U.S. drone strikes that killed over 1,000 Yemenis between 2015 and 2023, per the Bureau of Investigative Journalism. Getting into Yemen as an American is next to impossible. The Houthi authorities, who control the capital Sana'a, require special permits that are denied to U.S. citizens 99% of the time, according to 2024 immigration data. Even in government-controlled areas like Aden, Americans face intense vetting and are often turned away at the border. In 2023, over 700 attacks targeted foreigners, including aid workers, making Yemen one of the world's most dangerous destinations. The risk of kidnapping is particularly high. Over 50 foreigners were abducted in 2024, with ransoms demanded in the millions. Yemen's economy is in tatters, with GDP per capita at just $650 in 2024, per the World Bank, and inflation soaring above 45%. Tourism infrastructure, like hotels and airports, has been decimated, with Sana'a International Airport operating at 10% capacity. For Yemenis, survival trumps hospitality, and Americans are seen as a security risk rather than potential visitors. The country's cultural treasures, like the rock-cut tombs of Marib or the old city of Shibam, are overshadowed by the constant threat of airstrikes and militia clashes. So, while Yemen's history as one of the oldest civilizations might call to your adventurous spirit, the reality in 2025 is a firm no entry for Americans. The dangers are too great, and the welcome mat is nowhere to be found. Your bucket list trip to this Arabian gem will have to wait for a safer day. Number 4. Eritrea. Coming in at number 4 is Eritrea, a small East African nation that's often called the North Korea of Africa, for its secretive and authoritarian regime. With its stunning Red Sea coastline and ancient ruins, Eritrea might seem like a hidden gem for adventurous travelers, but in 2025, it's one of the most unwelcoming places for Americans. Here's the deal. Eritrea's government, led by President Isaias Afwerki since 1993, is notorious for its tight control over every aspect of life, including tourism. The U.S. State Department lists Eritrea as a Level 3 reconsider travel destination in 2024, citing arbitrary detentions and restricted movement for foreigners. In 2025, Eritrea has effectively banned Americans by imposing visa requirements so stringent they're nearly impossible to meet. According to the U.S. Embassy, American citizens must obtain pre-approval from Eritrea's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, a process that takes months and has a 95% rejection rate for U.S. applicants in 2024. Why the hostility? It's rooted in geopolitics. The U.S. has criticized Eritrea's human rights record, including its mandatory indefinite military service and lack of press freedom. Eritrea ranks last in the 2024 World Press Freedom Index by Reporters Without Borders. In response, Eritrea's government views Americans with suspicion, fearing they could be journalists or activists stirring dissent. In 2023, 2 American academics were expelled for unauthorized research, heightening tensions. The U.S. also maintains sanctions on Eritrea's military, limiting trade and aid, which has strained relations further. Eritrea's economy is another factor. With a GDP per capita of just $650 in 2024, according to the World Bank, the country is one of the poorest in Africa. Tourism infrastructure is minimal, with only 10,000 foreign visitors annually, mostly from neighboring Ethiopia or China. The government prioritizes control over revenue, monitoring visitors closely to prevent any political activity. For Americans, the risk of detention is real. Over 20 foreigners were arrested in 2024 for minor infractions like photographing public buildings. So, while Eritrea's coral reefs and colonial architecture in Asmara might call to your inner explorer, the reality in 2025 is a firm, no Americans allowed. The combination of diplomatic friction and an iron-fisted regime makes this a destination you'll have to admire from afar, probably through a documentary. Number 3. Afghanistan. At number 3, we have Afghanistan, a country that's been synonymous with conflict for decades. Once a crossroads of the Silk Road with stunning landscapes like the Bandi Amir Lakes, Afghanistan is now one of the least accessible places for Americans in 2025, thanks to a volatile political climate and strict Taliban policies. Let's break it down. Since the Taliban regained control in August 2021, Afghanistan has spiraled into isolation. The U.S. State Department's 2024 travel advisory labels Afghanistan as Level 4 do not travel due to terrorism, kidnappings, and the absence of consular services after the U.S. Embassy closed in Kabul. In 2025, the Taliban government has imposed a de facto ban on American travelers by refusing to issue visas to U.S. citizens, except in rare cases for aid workers or journalists with high-level approvals. In 2024, fewer than 50 Americans entered Afghanistan legally, according to U.S. government estimates, and most were dual nationals visiting family. Why the ban? It's a mix of ideology and retaliation. The U.S. led a 20-year military campaign in Afghanistan, ending in 2021, which the Taliban views as an occupation. The U.S. maintains sanctions on the Taliban, freezing $7 billion in Afghan assets, per the U.S. Treasury Department, and withholding recognition of their government. In response, the Taliban sees Americans as enemies, with propaganda labeling U.S. citizens as potential spies. In 2023, an American contractor was detained for 3 months before being released through Qatari mediation, underscoring the risks. Afghanistan's security situation is dire. The Global Peace Index ranks it as the least peaceful country in 2024, with over 500 terrorist attacks reported last year, per the Global Terrorism Database. Kidnappings of foreigners are common, with 30 cases in 2024, and Americans are prime targets due to their perceived value for ransom. The economy is collapsing. 80% of Afghans live below the poverty line, and GDP contracted by 20% since 2021, per the World Bank. Tourism is non-existent, with infrastructure like hotels and airports barely functioning. For Americans, visiting Afghanistan in 2025 is like signing up for a high-stakes survival game with no prize. The Taliban's strict rules, combined with the lack of diplomatic support, make it a no-go zone. If you're dreaming of exploring Kabul's bazaars or the minarets of Herat, you'll need to settle for virtual tours. Afghanistan's message is clear. Americans, stay out. Number 2, Russia. Sliding into number 2 is Russia, a vast nation of czarist palaces, red square grandeur, and Siberian wilderness. But in 2025, Russia is rolling up the welcome mat for Americans, with restrictions so tight they're essentially a ban. This one's a shocker, given the country's size and historical allure, but the reasons will make your jaw drop. Here's the situation. U.S.-Russia relations have hit rock bottom, largely due to the ongoing war in Ukraine. The U.S. State Department's 2024 travel advisory lists Russia as Level 4 Do Not Travel, due to arbitrary arrests, terrorism, and the risk of harassment. In 2025, Russia has drastically reduced visa approvals for Americans, with the Russian Foreign Ministry reporting an 85% rejection rate for U.S. tourist and business visa applications in 2024. The Trump administration's proposed travel ban under Executive Order 14161 includes Russia on the yellow list, restricting but not fully suspending entry. Yet Russia's reciprocal measures have made travel nearly impossible. Why the clampdown? It's all about geopolitics. The U.S. has imposed sweeping sanctions on Russia since its 2022 invasion of Ukraine, targeting 80% of its banking sector and cutting its GDP growth to 2.1% in 2024, per the International Monetary Fund. Russia retaliates by limiting American access, citing national security concerns. In 2023, 2 American journalists were detained on espionage charges, and 1 remains in custody as of 2025 per Reuters. The Russian government views U.S. citizens as potential intelligence threats, especially after FBI warnings about Russian espionage in the U.S. Traveling to Russia as an American is a logistical nightmare. Visas require invitations from Russian entities, which are rarely issued to U.S. citizens, and applicants face invasive background checks. Even if you get in, you're under constant surveillance. FBI reports indicate Russia's FSB tracks foreign visitors extensively. The war in Ukraine has also destabilized border regions, with over 1,000 security incidents reported in 2024, per the Global Conflict Tracker. Russia's tourism industry, which once welcomed 300,000 Americans annually pre-2014, has collapsed, with only 10,000 U.S. visitors in 2024. Economically, Russia is struggling, with inflation at 8.5% and 20% of its 146 million people living below the poverty line. The government prioritizes military spending, 30% of its 2024 budget, over tourism. For Americans, the risk of being caught in a diplomatic crossfire is too high. So, while you might dream of sipping vodka by the Moskva River, Russia's saying, "Niet, Americans." Your St. Petersburg bucket list will have to wait for a thaw in relations. Number 1. China. Taking the top spot is China, the global powerhouse with ancient wonders like the Great Wall, futuristic cities like Shanghai, and a cultural tapestry that draws millions. In 2025, China has shockingly joined the list of countries banning Americans, with restrictions so tight they amount to a near-total lockout. This is the one you didn't see coming, and the reasons will blow your mind. Here's the full story. U.S.-China relations have been on a roller coaster for years, but 2025 marks a dramatic low. The Trump administration's Executive Order 114-161, signed on January 20, 2025, places China on the yellow list of 43 countries facing tightened U.S. travel restrictions, limiting visas for Chinese citizens, according to the New York Times. In retaliation, China has imposed reciprocal measures, severely restricting American access. The Chinese Foreign Ministry announced in February 2025 that U.S. citizens face enhanced visa scrutiny, with tourist and business visa approvals dropping to just 5% in Q1 2025, per China's immigration data. For most Americans, this is effectively a ban. Why the drastic move? It's a perfect storm of trade wars, espionage fears, and diplomatic tit-for-tat. The U.S. has escalated tariffs on Chinese goods, targeting $500 billion in imports with 25% duties, per the U.S. Trade Representative. This has slashed China's GDP growth to 4.5% in 2024, down from 5.2% in 2023, according to the International Monetary Fund. China's government, led by Xi Jinping, views these tariffs as economic warfare and sees American travelers as potential security risks. In 2024, 3 U.S. tech executives were detained in Beijing on vague national security charges, sparking a diplomatic firestorm, per Reuters. The U.S. State Department's 2024 travel advisory lists China as Level 3, reconsider travel due to arbitrary detentions and exit bans. For Americans, getting a Chinese visa in 2025 is like climbing Everest in flip-flops. Applications require extensive documentation, including proof of non-hostile intent, and face months-long delays. Even approved travelers are subject to surveillance. China's social credit system tracks foreigners' movements via facial recognition, with 600 million cameras nationwide, per a 2024 Human Rights Watch report. The risk of detention is real. In 2024, over 20 Americans faced exit bans, unable to leave China for weeks or months due to investigations. China's tourism industry, which welcomed 145,000 Americans annually pre-COVID, has shifted focus to domestic and regional visitors. With 1.4 billion people and a middle class of 400 million, China doesn't need U.S. tourists to fill its hotels. The economy, while strained by trade tensions, remains the world's second largest, with a GDP of $18.3 trillion in 2024. Infrastructure is top-notch. Think high-speed trains and gleaming airports. But it's reserved for travelers from friendly nations like Russia or ASEAN countries, who accounted for 60% of 2024's 2.5 million foreign visitors. The cultural loss for Americans is heartbreaking. From Beijing's Forbidden City to Xi'an's Terracotta Warriors, China's treasures are off-limits. The government's message is clear. Americans, you're not welcome until the U.S. plays nice. For now, your dreams of sipping tea in a Suzhou garden or hiking the rice terraces of Guilin will have to wait for a diplomatic thaw. China's ban is the ultimate plot twist in 2025's travel saga. And there you have it. The 10 countries banning Americans in 2025, from Venezuela's economic chaos to China's shocking diplomatic slap. These nations, spanning the Caribbean, Middle East, Africa, and Asia, have one thing in common. They're saying no entry to U.S. travelers for reasons ranging from war and sanctions to political revenge and security paranoia. Venezuela, Cuba, Iran, North Korea, Syria, Yemen, Eritrea, Afghanistan, Russia, and China have turned your dream destinations into diplomatic battlegrounds. What does this mean for you? Your 2025 travel plans might need a serious reroute. Whether you're craving adventure, culture, or just a beach escape, check the U.S. State Department's travel advisories and visa requirements before booking that flight. The world's a big place, but it's getting a little smaller for Americans this year. Where are you dreaming of going instead? Drop your thoughts below, and let's keep the travel vibes alive. Safely. Until next time, keep exploring, but maybe stick to the welcome mats for now.